It's a pleasure to present this paper in your chairmanship, and I would like to inform the audience that the abstract of this paper is available on page number 226 and 227 of the book of abstracts with submission number 202. I would like to begin by sharing my slides. I hope that is visible now.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yep, visible. Okay.
Yes. So let me start. The idea here is to understand the origin and distribution of two very productive suffixes of Hindi Urdu language. One is daar and the other is gaar. I am calling them suffixes of Hindi Urdu language here, and I know very well that these suffixes are highly prevalent in various other languages of Indo-Aryan family as well as Dravidian family. So here I will first try to take into consideration some preliminary ideas about the behavior of language, human language, some introductory ideas about morphological processes, and then try to understand these two suffixes and their behavior, their distribution particularly, as we find in Hindi and Urdu. So let me begin by discussing some points about the human languages, and especially when they are analyzed. We have noticed that human languages often, when they are analyzed as isolate beings. It appears as if those languages are existing alone, which may not be a true factor. In fact, languages are constantly interacting with each other. They are constantly giving and taking with each other, like human beings do. And in the process, there is a lot of influence from each other. So these influences are often studied in some subdomains of linguistics, but then very often the influences are ignored. Today's discussion on daar and gaar suffixes probably are related to that only, that kind of an influence that Hindi and Urdu have received from some other sources, which we shall be examining in a short while. We also understand that the source of vocabulary for Hindi and Urdu are diverse. I mean, the sources are diverse in nature. You have Sanskrit and Persian, which have contributed chiefly. There are several other languages also that have contributed to the lexicon of Hindi and Urdu, and it's not just about taking some words, rather these are word formation strategies that have percolated into these languages. So that is why we are interested to understand the behavior of these two productive suffixal morphemes, dar and gaar. Let us just see what models we have to understand morphology, and the prevalent models are summarized in three groups. And we have item and arrangement model, which is a morpheme based model, which is very old, very helpful, where individual morphemes or words are treated like sequences of morphemes, and morphemes or say word forms or word parts which are identical in their behavior are considered to be morphemes, and similar arrangements are like put together as a item and arrangement model. So that's a morpheme based approach, very old but very helpful also. Then we see that there is another model called item and process model. So in item and process model, which is a lexeme based approach, we notice that words are considered. When words are considered, rules are applied to it, and based on certain rules, those words are developed. Then at a later stage, we find that word and paradigm model also emerged, and that model states that nothing less than a word can be considered for analysis. Now, when we have suffixes for our object of study, what model are we going to choose? And why should we choose a particular model? So to understand this problem, when we started analyzing the data that we had, we felt that not a single model would be very, very helpful. There are contributions from item and arrangement, which would be helpful here. There are some contributions from item and process model, which would also be helpful here, and some from word and paradigm model that would also be helpful. So our understanding here is that it is not a very good practice to go by a single model to understand the behavior of a phenomena or of an entity for a language. Therefore, it would be good to take the best of all the models and then apply them into the phenomena that is being examined. Before proceeding further, let me also discuss a few conceptual terms that I have used to understand my data here, and that would be helpful in understanding the perspective in which this data would be presented. The first one is lexis, and that refers to the whole set of words of a language. It is slightly different from corpus. Corpus may refer to a body of a text, audio, or video, but then it may not be complete. It may not give all the words of a language, but lexis is. Now, if you ask me to show you a lexis of a language, it would be difficult. Apart from these, that means lexis is an abstract term and corpus may be more concrete. But at the same time, we have something called lexicon, which helps us not just identify words and use them, but also helps us know the rules by which we can develop words, by which we can form sentences, by which we can identify the ones which are incorrect. Similarly, we have a very frequently occurring word called words, and we all feel that we are aware of it, and there are various definitions available to that, but then most of them have their own limitations. If you look at how words are defined, there are some definitions to which a lot of scholars agree, and here I'm not to contest those agreed definitions. The point is very similar. My intention here is to distinguish between words and word forms. So words are any words which can exist freely, which are separated by white spaces orthographically, and which have some grammatical or semantic content. They can be function words, they can be content words. But then the same words, for instance, a word like pen, and if its plural form is pens, I consider them as two word forms. They are not two words, but they are two word forms. Also, I agree to the view that individually, the word which we are, the object that we are calling by the word pen is basically a lexeme only when it is used in a context. Only when it is used in a context, it becomes a word. That means when we apply a lexeme in a sentence or in a context, it becomes a word, and based on that context or that sentence, it acquires different forms, and we call them word forms. Similarly, sometimes some words indicate that they can be reconstructed, or they can be analyzed to arrive at the roots, and we shall be examining them. Here, the word formation is basically a process of derivation. It is related to derivational morphology, and the intention here is to show how the two suffixes in consideration have helped the word formation process. They are very active members of the word formation process in the concerned languages, and there are instances in these languages where the word forms are available, and if we try to do some kind of back formation and arrive at the roots, arrive at the suffixes and the main word, we may be misled. So the process of back formation may not be very helpful here. We'll examine all that. Let me bring before you the questions that have motivated the carrying out of this research. So here, one of the curiosities for us was to know the dar and gaar suffixes that are extensively used in word formation processes of Hindi and several Indo-Aryan languages. We were interested to know whether they have monovular roots or they have different roots, especially when we look at the parent language, especially when we look at the languages from which they have transcended into Hindi and Urdu. We were also interested to know the semantic values they carry. Is it alike, or there is a kind of intersecting set, or the sets are intersecting in nature? Then we also were interested to know how these two suffixes behave in comparison to several other suffixes, and those especially those that have similar kind of semantic and functional values, especially from various other languages from which Hindi and Urdu have received roots, for instance, Sanskrit and Persian. Then how this understanding of suffixes may contribute to morphological analysis, and how this can also be helpful for developing pedagogical or machine translation requirements, how this can help in that. So let us examine the suffixes once again. We are into analyzing dar and gaar suffixes, which function as very productive morphological suffixes, and mostly they occur in complex words. We shall be seeing that also. And then we also notice that by looking at the corpus, we understand that dar is more productive than gaar in the vocabulary of Hindi and Urdu. Then we look at the origin of these two suffixes, and we examine how they might have reached. Based on the archival research, it appears that dar is also prevalent in other languages like Baluchi, Kurdish, and Persian. And in those languages, the semantic content of the suffix, both the suffixes, are identical in nature. So that is one clue that we can have for the origin of the two suffixes being considered here. Let us examine the distribution. Let us have a look at how these suffixes are distributed in the concerned languages. A set of data that has the dar suffix, which help us in creating words like shandar, maldar, asardar, referring to effective, dildar referring to generous, masaledar referring to spicy, rasdar referring to juicy, malaidar referring to creamy, imandar referring to honest, samajdar referring to person with understanding. So these instances motivate us to understand that the suffix dar in the words that are being presented here evokes the meaning of copiousness, the meaning of fullness, richness, or lucrativeness, besides also indicating the meaning of having or possessing. Let me present before you the second set that has words like khushbudar, thanedar, danedar, havildar, chaukidar, karzdar, zamindar, zimmedar, jandar. These are all instances that evoke the meaning of persons, designations, official positions, besides indicating the sense of having or possessing. We also move on to the next set of data that has the gaar suffix. We have words like madadgar, talabgar, begar, khidmatgar, sitamgar, yadgar, sazgar, rozgar, and gunahgar. So these words having the gaar suffix also refer to individuals, objects, and phenomena, and we notice that semantic value of gaar and dar are similar in nature, at least up to the data that we have seen. I should like to present the next set of data before you, and that has words like gaddar, kirdar, khabardar, sardar, bedar, devdar, didar, jhalakdar, jodidar, and khuddar. referring to words like disloyal, role, alert, etc. The reason behind striking off this distribution is to indicate that our initial idea of including these words as instances of dar suffix may be misleading. It may be our false back formation that we have included these words here. We notice that from breaking the word in two parts. So we try to analyze gaddar, and we detach dar from gaddar, and we notice that it does not lead to any word of semantic value. We again detach dar from kirdar, and we notice that it does not lead to any proper word. Why are we detaching this way? Because initially we have discussed that we are considering complex words where dar and gar are actually acting as suffixes. They are suffixal morphemes, and that is why we are distributing these words in two parts and trying to understand if dar and gar are suffixes in them also. We look at khabardar, and at the surface it looks like khabardar is an individual who has information, and basically the word semantically refers to alert, and it would be wrong to detach dar from khabardar. Similarly, it would be wrong to detach dar from sardar or dar from bedar, or similarly it would be wrong to detach dar from devdar or dar from didar or jhalakdar or jodidar or khuddar. That means our attempt to detach this suffix from these words or the words of this set would be false back formation. It would be inadequate. Let me also present before you some other suffixes like kar and purn of Sanskrit origin, and we notice that we have words like swarnkar, chitrakar, patrakar, lekhakar, chunoti purn, and if we compare them with something like davedar or mehmandar, at the surface we might feel that the phonological forms are similar, and that is why it could be possible that dar and gar are of Sanskrit origin. So at the surface it appears like belonging to Sanskrit origin. But when we analyze it, when we analyze these words with the suffixes dar and gar available in various languages like Persian, Baloch, Turkish, to some extent Arabic also, we notice that these suffixes have similar kind of phonological and semantic value in the concerned languages, and that is why it could be possible that when Persian served here as an official language, the suffixes got into Hindi and Urdu and other Indo-Aryan languages, and not only as individual words but also as a kind of a process or a strategy for word formation. So the observations that we are making here are as follows. The first one is these suffixes appear in multimorphemic words. These are the words which have these suffixes are not simplexes. These are like bimorphemic or multimorphemic in nature, number one. We also notice that in Persian, dar suffix means holder and it refers to in charge. So that way it becomes very close. We also notice that the sets of words representing dar and gar do not form a union. That means all words or all senses in which the dar and suffix suffix words are there will be mapped onto the set of words having gar suffixes. That means the sets of words representing dar and gar suffixes do not form a union. They are intersecting in nature. We also notice that the semantic values that these suffixes are in a kind of a spectrum. So you have a range that will vary from possessing to holding to being full of and things like that. Our findings are like dar and gar suffixes that have been part of Hindi Urdu word formation processes and lexicon for a very long time are very productive in nature, and their meanings are ranging. Both the suffixes are of monovular roots. Here, monovular roots means they are not of similar origin. Though they have similar phonological forms, their origin may be different, and that is why their functions and their semantic values are not identical. Then we also look at their comparison with words like dan or kar or purn of Sanskrit origin, and they are comparable because both Persian and Sanskrit are from similar or from common parent language, from common ancestors. The mapping of forms and functions indicates that though these are like in complementary distribution, I hope I had discussed that earlier also, both dar and gaar are in complementary distribution. Words that will have the dar suffix will not have the gaar suffix. Words that have the gaar suffix will not have the dar suffix. So the two suffixes are in complementary distribution. We notice that the conditions that motivate the distribution of these suffixes are not very well known. Why one word chose dar and the other chose gaar is not clear to us. We could not arrive at that answer. We tried to figure that out by examining the phonological form, and we noticed that the phonological forms, the segments, etc., are not able to explain that satisfactorily. The syntactic aspects and phonological aspects anyway are beyond the research, beyond the scope of this research. We also analyzed where this kind of research will be applicable, and we noticed that for language analysis, in particular morphological analysis of Hindi and Urdu, this would be very helpful because both are very productive suffixes. For historical reconstruction also, especially when we want to know how a certain word came into the lexicon of a language, because it is very clear that several words containing these suffixes are prevalent across the country in several languages and language families. So it would be easier to reconstruct them for lexical studies and also for language teaching purposes. If that is available, it would also be helpful for developing translation memories where the forms of these words would be easily transferred in the target language comfortably. So these are some of the applications that I have understood. For the collection of data, I was benefited from my colleagues at NTS and NTM, Dr. Imran, Dr. Salim, Dr. Naushad, and Dr. Halim are acknowledged with thanks here. And these are, I could not get too many references, some of which I could get are available here. Most of these things are dictionary-like resources available online. Thank you a lot for the opportunity. And if there are questions, I would be happy to answer them. I guess Dr. Amlesh has a question.
So that's an observation. Thank you, the chair, for giving me the opportunity. Tariq, it was a nice presentation. A couple of things actually. I can now connect some of these words, not just the suffix, are actually also possibly borrowed in some other eastern branch of Aryan group of languages. I can actually talk about Assamese and Bangla, where I have some of these words directly possibly borrowed from say Persian origin or Arabic origin. Those are now what I thought possibly you need to consider the semantic rules that these suffixes are performing in different contexts. So phonologically, of course, we might not get much idea because not much is happening within those word boundaries and all. But if we actually bring into the semantic rules, possibly that research might get a concrete shape that way. So their syntactic functioning and then the semantic rules possibly you may like to consider. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the good observations. This is what I have also been claiming, that though the words are assumed to be belonging to only Hindi Urdu, but if we examine closely, we'll notice that these words are prevalent across the country, not only in Hindi Urdu, but in several languages, even that of other families than Indo-Aryan. Number one. Number two, if we look at, initially when we tried to understand the segments and we got a word like madad gar, so our motivation was that because madad has already the consonant cluster, it would be very difficult if another da comes at the word boundary. So, but then those observations were very initial in nature, and it looked like it cannot proceed in this direction further with other examples. So that is why we left the phonological aspects completely.
Exactly. So no, I felt like semantics and syntactic inquiries like those domains can give you further explanations in this regard. Some of the words I felt like whether they can be really divided. I cannot recall the example, but when I was going through the data, I thought some of the words are a single morpheme. You cannot possibly divide them saying that gaar and daar is the suffixes there, and then there is a root. Rather, it appears to be a single word. So,
Yes, yes, I agree with you on that. I completely agree with you on that. There was a purpose behind putting them in the data set. That is why the title of that slide was striked off, just to indicate that those were false back formations. Just to know if somebody would be motivated to analyze them as words and suffixes, and it would be wrong. So that is why it came at the end as a slide with title striked off.
Sir, I just want to ask that the example that you gave, Devdar. So this
Devdar.
yeah. So this dar, isn't it from the Indo-European root doru, from which tree also comes? Like daru we have in Sanskrit.
Yes, yes, I agree with you on that. There it would refer to a log. It would refer to a log, and that log would come from a tree. So Devdar is a tree, as I have discussed. I am very sure that was a time when the connection also went off. Devdar is a tree which is found primarily in those areas which receive snowfall, and they appear to be similar to pine trees, but these are trees which are very strong, and they are basically they are different from pine trees, and they are indicators of snowfall areas geographically. So there I agree that that root in Devdar would be referring to log. Okay, I agree to you on that.
And sir, the other words that you discussed, khidmat, sitam, yad, saz, roz, guna, madad, talab, all of these words are of Persian origin. So that might be a hint, no, that due to analogy, we are using these morphemes on Aryan, Indo-Aryan words or later in
Yes,
Hindi.
yes, yes. That is what I am also saying.
Okay, sir.